Good morning. Welcome to Tech Day 2020. The title of this session is Be Cyber Smart. I want to begin by mentioning that this session is being recorded. At the end of the session, please fill out the prompted survey to be placed in the opportunity drawing to win a CSUF Titan Neck Gator. During this session, please use the Q&A feature to submit questions. We will answer as many as we can after the presentation. I would now like to introduce our speakers. Dr. Mikhail Gofman is an associate professor in the computer science department at Cal State Fullerton. And Miguel works as a principal solutions and security engineer with VeriToll LLC. Welcome, Mikhail and Miguel.
Thank you so much, Jovita. It's great to be here, and I'll share my screen. I hope it's visible. So, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I will begin by talking about my presentation, and then later on, I'll be joined by my colleague, Miguel. So, just a little bit about myself. I am a associate professor at the computer science department here, and my research focuses on biometrics. Now, why did I want to make this presentation about biometrics, besides the fact that it happened to be my field? Well, biometrics happens to be one of the most misunderstood areas of cybersecurity. And part of being cyber smart is going by the facts, making decisions based on facts and research and evidence versus based on hype, paranoia, and biased beliefs. So I'm hoping that this presentation will inform you about biometrics technology and the fact that it's being misunderstood and a lot of its criticisms are not actually valid. At no point of this presentation will I be arguing that biometrics is a perfect technology. It's a technology that has certainly its challenges, and those challenges are being addressed as we speak. But at the same time, a lot of the concerns, a lot of the paranoia surrounding the technology is not fact-based. So let me begin by introducing what biometrics actually is. Even about 5 years ago, not everybody knew what the term meant. Now, biometrics has entered from the realm of science fiction, from the realm of the movies, into the everyday mundane reality. So many people use face recognition on their phones, on their iPads. Fingerprints are also commonly used. Some of the more pioneering mobile devices now include iris recognition, such as the Samsung Galaxy. There is voice recognition and so many other biometrics that are in the process of being developed and are even being deployed experimentally. Now, yes, biometrics is growing in popularity. It's very frequently used in mobile applications, as we talked about. Also, it is used almost pervasively in government, in military, in business, really all kinds of applications. As popular as biometrics is, and as much as some people realize its importance, it's also a technology that is fiercely attacked by critics. Of course, as any technology out there, especially in cybersecurity, it should be biometrics, it should be scrutinized, it should constantly be critiqued. However, when we critique things, it's very important that our critiques are based on facts, not on paranoia and not on hype, as I mentioned before. So the point of this discussion is to just give you the best possible accurate information about what biometrics is, where it is right now, and what are the real cybersecurity implications of using this technology. Hopefully, knowing this information will help you to stay more cyber smart. So, biometrics is very controversial. If you read the news, you constantly hear people talk about all of the almost apocalyptic implications that biometrics is going to bring about. Even cybersecurity experts, even seasoned cybersecurity experts, argue that biometrics can be easily hacked. A lot of the articles online, they talk about how once the system stores your biometric data, it can be easily shared with anyone. And if the system is hacked, then the attacker has your biometric data and they basically own your life. Another concern, which is frequently being cited, is that biometrics are unreliable. So, how accurate are those criticisms, and how concerned should you be? And more importantly, are those concerns a valid ground for abandoning the use of this technology, as so many sources seem to argue? That's what I hope to discuss. Let's take those claims one by one and see where they stand in terms of facts. So, first, let's talk about the security concerns of biometrics. So, the first claim is that biometric systems are easily hackable. What do we mean by that? Well, you have probably read the articles or at least heard stories about how biometric sensors can be easily fooled. And in fact, there have been cases where biometrics have been bypassed. One of the iconic events here is the Apple iPhone 5S. Within a week after the phone was released, it was hacked by the German hacker group called Chaos Computer Club. They fabricated an artificial finger and they used it in order to fool the fingerprint reader on the phone. And also, similar techniques were successful against the fingerprint readers on the Samsung Galaxy phones, as well as the phones of other manufacturers. Another undeniable fact is that Apple Face ID, the Apple's new face recognition system for mobile devices, also was bypassed using a $250 3D mask, which was manufactured by a Vietnamese company. It was able to deceive iPhone's face recognition. Other cases are also similar. You can read about cases where phones and other biometric systems were supposedly fooled by holding up the photos of people's faces or showing videos of their faces. So, does this mean that your fingerprint readers, your face recognition systems are no longer secure? Does this mean that anyone can just come and access your device without much difficulty? Well, here is where the facts stand. Yes, those compromises they did indeed happen. However, one thing to keep in mind, and this is something that the media very rarely mentions, is that how much effort and technical skill it actually required in order to bypass those systems. For example, the 3D mask, which was used to fool the face recognition in iPhone, the Face ID specifically, it cost $250 and it required security researchers to spend significant time and effort in order to replicate the person's face. In other words, this is not an endeavor that a typical casual attacker would be willing to take. Even for a skilled attacker, this would not be a trivial task. Once again, this was done by the security researchers. Similar thing with the fingerprint reading. In order to deceive the fingerprint reader in iPhone 5S and the fingerprinting technology in phones has significantly improved since then. But even to deceive that reader, once again, it took a group of very skilled hackers, significant time, and a lot of experimentation and materials in order to bypass that. Now, how concerned should you be? Well, folks, you have to remember that the technology is constantly improving and is moving ahead. All of the articles which talk about attacks which were able to bypass face recognition by holding up a photo of the person's face or playing a video of the person's face, those attacks are no longer viable. Modern systems, they rely on 3D face recognition, and it simply cannot be fooled with photographs and videos. It's simply impossible. In addition, the modern fingerprint technologies, they use a lot of very advanced techniques, which makes them much more difficult to bypass. First of all, instead of simply taking an image of the outer surface of your finger, modern fingerprint readers, they use something called subepidermal imaging, where they actually read the internal structure of your fingerprint. In addition, they test for signs of life, such as, for example, does the fingerprint have a pulse? Does it have temperature? Does it have proper capacitance? So, in other words, even if somebody cuts off the finger of the victim, or, for example, tries to put a finger of the corpse onto the fingerprint reader, it will not be able to authenticate. I apologize for being so morbid, but this is important. And I guess it's Halloween too, so maybe it might be appropriate. In addition to the techniques which are already deployed, which make fingerprint readers very difficult to bypass, there is also a tremendous body of research which outlines techniques for detecting signs of a biometric spoofing. Whenever you spoof a biometric modality, be it face, be it fingerprint, it doesn't really matter. Oftentimes, it leaves artifacts that are very difficult to eliminate. And researchers have jumped on that, and there is significant work on trying to detect those artifacts. On top of this, as we speak, biometrics is becoming more and more secure. Different modalities are emerging. For example, iris being the new popular one. There are new imaging technologies, new machine learning algorithms. Basically, biometrics are not very easy to hack. And I will compare the security of biometrics to passwords. Some people argue that because of the limitations of biometrics and then citing some kind of a event where biometric system has been bypassed, they say that's why we should stay with passwords, the traditional username and password scheme. Well, the username and password scheme has been a disaster from day one. Why is that? Well, because designing secure passwords is challenging. And what exactly is a secure password? For most users, there is no answer which comes to their mind. Yes, there are definitions, but those definitions, they keep changing, and passwords are becoming easier and easier to break. This has to do with the computational power increasing, and also this has to do with research. For example, there has been a paper published which deals with password topologies. Even long passwords and seemingly secured passwords, which follow all of the guidelines of what a secure password should be, can sometimes be easily broken because passwords passwords have a certain structure and follow a certain pattern oftentimes, which can be used in order to crack them. Also, passwords can be very easily stolen by casual attackers. You can use keyloggers, or you can simply use techniques like shoulder surfing. You can look at people's post-it notes, and yes, people still do write their passwords on post-it notes. In addition, When it comes to something like passwords, people are simply used to them. And people still don't believe that there is such thing as a secure password. And yes, even as late as today, the passwords of 123 remain popular. We cannot trust people with passwords. It never worked, and it's not working now. One of my colleagues has criticized this argument, saying that all of those issues that people attribute with passwords, they're management issues. Well, that may be true. However, those management issues are inherent to usernames and passwords. It's the approach that makes this management problem possible and makes it an inherent issue. With biometrics, people don't have to design a strong password. They don't have to remember a password. They don't have to protect a password. And fooling a modern biometric system is significantly more difficult than stealing somebody's password. Sources such as IC Squared, they argue that biometrics, when properly implemented, they're one of the most secure forms of authentication. So even at its worst, oops, even at its worst, biometrics are significantly more secure than passwords. Also, before I leave this topic alone, I've heard people use the arguments, well, biometrics is like a username, it's not like a password. This is not a correct way of viewing the biometric technology, because viewing biometric technology in terms of username and password is simply falling into the trap of when all you have is a hammer, every single problem seems to be a nail. Biometrics is completely different. It's incomparable to username and password on a very fundamental level. The username and password, they verify identity based on something that you know. Biometrics verifies your identity based on something that you are. You cannot compare them. You cannot view one in terms of the other. It's a fundamental flaw. So that's the first argument. The second claim is, so once I enroll my biometrics in a system, the biometrics can be easily stolen. After all, don't systems get hacked all the time and data gets divulged? So if the system stores my biometric data, wouldn't my biometric data be stolen as well? And of course, once your biometric data is stolen, it cannot be changed. So is biometrics basically asking for trouble? Let's examine this claim as well. So folks, this is probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of biometrics, how the data that you enroll into the system is actually stored. First and foremost, even the most unsecure biometric implementations, which don't try to protect your biometric data in any way, they take the data which you enroll and they convert it into a digital form known as the template. The unsecured template contains the mathematical data necessary to identify you. It is very difficult and in some cases almost impossible to take the data that is stored inside the biometric template and convert it back into the usable identifying data. It's just the inherent nature of how biometrics works. But this is just the unsecured templates. No modern production level biometric system would ever use an unsecured template. The real world biometric systems, they use what's called one-way template. They take your data, which you enroll into the system, and they transform it using what's called a one-way function. So the output of that function can be used in order to match your biometric data, but it cannot be used in order to get back the actual identifying data. So if somebody steals your one-way template, well, basically there is no identifying data in there. It's not that there is data in there that is protected through encryption. There is basically just no identifying data in there. It's mathematically transformed in such a way so that you can still do biometric matching, but you cannot extract any kind of information. it's mathematically impossible. Okay. So even if the system is hacked and your template is stolen, well, basically, if they don't have your identifying data. It's as simple as that. There are also revocable templates. So if your template is stolen, you can always replace it with another template. And it's done by basically combining your biometric data with some sort of other kind of input data. It could be a random number. It could be, for example, another authentication technique, such as a password. And it combines those two things in order to create a template. And if that template is stolen, well, no big deal, because you can just combine biometrics with some kind of other data, and you have a completely new template, and you still get to use biometrics. On top of using secure templates, the vast majority of modern biometric systems, they protect your biometric data using hardware-based techniques. For example, the Apple iPhone uses something called a secure enclave processor. It's a hardware environment where all of your biometric storage and matching takes place. In order to get to your template, which is secure to begin with, you have to bypass all of this hardware security, which is not a trivial task at all. And the way in which such systems work is that they're basically they have dedicated hardware, they have dedicated operating system that is completely separate from the main system of your phone. And the interaction between the main system and the biometric system is very minimal. It's basically limited to the main system being able to request verification, and then the entire verification takes place on that separate piece of hardware, and it just returns the result. Did it match or did it not match? So your biometric data, when it's stored properly, it is secure. And as far as your phones go, you have very little to worry about. Your data is being stored in secure templates, and it's being protected by hardware. It is basically impossible to get back your identifying features by stealing the templates. Okay. So another claim is that the biometric matching is too inaccurate for everyday use. So how true is this claim? You frequently hear stories about biometrics either falsely identifying an illegitimate user as legitimate and vice versa. So how true is this claim? Well, there are certainly challenges in biometric recognition. For example, it is a known fact that facial recognition is harder in women, specifically women of African American descent. There are also other challenges which have to do with specific ethnicities. This is an active research problem and definitely a problem that deserves attention. Also, biometric recognition is definitely much more challenging in uncontrolled conditions. For example, cases where the face happens to be occluded by things like face wear, glasses, makeup, etc. The fingerprint recognition is more challenging when your fingers are dirty. All of those are true. However, do these challenges render biometrics too unreliable for everyday use? Let's take a look at the facts. Face recognition, with all the challenges that it faces, how good or bad is it? Well, according to the studies conducted by the National Institute of Standards in 2020, the leading face recognition algorithm has an error rate of 0.08. Now, this is a huge improvement from 2014, where the error rate was 4.1%. And it's continuing to improve thanks to the new sensors and to the new machine learning approaches. Also, when the National Institute of Standards has experimented with contactless multi-fingerprint readers, which are fingerprint readers which you don't even have to touch, and they get fingerprints of most fingers, it had an accuracy rate of 99.5%. The fingerprint readers, which do require contact, can achieve an even higher accuracy. Also, one of the premier technologies in biometrics, which has been around actually for a long time, but it's becoming more and more popular in mobile devices, is the iris recognition. If you own a Galaxy phone, you probably have this. So how secure is this new technology? Well, looking at the theory, there is less than 1 in 10 billion chance that two irises have even a 30% similarity. And back in 2018, there have been experiments done in what's called one-to-one matching. In biometrics, one-to-one matching refers to verifying the identity of the person. For example, I claim to be Mikhail, and it's the system's job to verify based on my iris whether I'm actually Mikhail or I'm somebody else. So in those experiments, the system wrongly denied access to a legitimate user in 1 out of 175 authorized users. In addition, the system has falsely granted access to an unauthorized user 1 in 100,000 users. This is something that they rarely talk about. So, biometrics, folks, is actually exceedingly reliable. And one of the evidences of that is not just the research, which will provide you all of the facts. It's not just the empirical evaluations, which will provide you the evidence, but look around you. The enterprises are using it more and more. The government is using it. The military is using it. Are they all just ignorant? Well, no, folks. They're using it because it works and they're realizing its viability. And the reason why they realize their viability is because they get their information about this from research, from experiments, and from facts. And when you look at the evidence, I think the viability of biometrics is very difficult to dispute, in spite of all of its limitations. So, in conclusion, biometrics is by no means a perfect technology. It's a technology that is constantly maturing. However, based on the facts, it is a very viable technology. Its use is growing, and we will see more and more deployment of biometric security in enterprises because not only does it increase security, but it also helps with cost savings. It also can be much more user friendly. It can save time. And um, the technology will still will have to overcome more challenges in the future. For example, because of COVID-19, there are now concerns about the fingerprint readers because people are wearing gloves. Though there are technologies which can now penetrate gloves, there are also concerns that fingerprint readers can contribute to the spread of viruses. Contactless biometrics can help overcome that. Uh, Face ID cannot recognize people wearing masks. That can also be eventually overcome, I believe, through more advanced sensing technologies, as well as machine learning algorithms, which can recognize people based on partial face recognition. And that's a very active area of research. With all of this said, biometrics is big. It'll get bigger. It's coming to your workplace, to your phone, to your computer. And I think when you make your cyber smart decisions about the use of biometrics, go by the facts and not by this sensationalist media or by the paranoia. The same approach applies to all areas of cybersecurity. Get the facts despite what you know and believe. And this is all I have. And about the about other areas of cybersecurity where making fact-based decisions is just as important, I would like to hand over the floor to my respected colleague, Mr. Miguel Calles from the VeriToll LLC.
Thank you, Dr. Gofman. That was a very informative and interesting presentation. I'll be sharing the screen. So in this presentation, I'll be discussing a few points on how to be cyber smart. Cover a broad area of different of things we've learned over 2020. It's been a very enlightening year in very many facets of life, as we all have experienced. So let's take a hypothetical situation. I'm wondering if this ever happened to you, or you know of someone that it has ever happened to. So let's suppose there's two individuals watching television on their smart TV. So one of them makes a casual comment about the toilet paper being out again at the stores. We can relate to that situation earlier in the year. And all of a sudden they get a push notification. So they pull out their phones and they get an advertisement saying, quickly buy toilet paper before it gets lost. There's only one left. Hopefully this somewhat humorous situation, hypothetical situation, highlights an area. Was this really a coincidence? Has this ever happened? I know of at least two people where it has happened, and it makes me wonder if our devices are actually listening to us. So makes me wonder, would my device ever spy on me? I mean, we've embraced them to be a member of the family. They're in our home, they live with us. We interact with them possibly every day or multiple times a day. So would it ever spy on us? So there's an article that recently came out that Amazon is embracing surveillance as a service, and they're using their Alexa platform. There's very similar articles as well of Siri busting into conversations unexpectedly due to a false triggers of the algorithm that wakes it up. So it makes me wonder, do we need to be cautious about what we say at home and around these devices? And as smart devices are becoming more popular, we're inviting more and more of them into our homes, and we're actually buying devices that are meant to help to monitor. There's the Alexa Guard service that uses Echo to monitor when you're away from home. If it detects there's intrusion, when you're not supposed to be there, that's probably a bad sign. And Ring has become a very popular product because you can see video notification of people at your doorbell, and now you can have them do surveillance inside your home. The idea of a drone flying around is pretty amazing. But are they secure? Are they private? Do we really want these devices in our home? So just some things to think about. I'd like to switch over to some of the things that we learned from this pandemic. In summary, the COVID-19 pandemic was really a stress test for all of us. In the cybersecurity world, there were companies that were just not set up to support remote work. They set up all the infrastructures assuming that all the users would be inside of a building, inside of a physical perimeter, and then having to disperse them all and still keep them productive, because loss of productivity means a loss of money and profit, because you still have to pay employees to work, contractors to work, and if they're not generating value that brings in sales, you're taking a loss there. And it was like that with schools and almost everything that we do. And unfortunately, there are people out there that are looking for opportunities to take advantage of situations. They use the fear, they use the chaos, people being unprepared to take advantage of the situation. So we're going to cover some of these areas that the threat was probably there all along, but just given the change in the situation, that the threat became more heightened. So Zoom has been around for quite a while, and they were growing in popularity already, but having to move people into remote work, their service became used by many institutions, many companies, and the attackers, they noticed this trend and they purposely started looking for all the vulnerabilities. And so you might have read many articles, seen news feeds on some of the things that happened with Zoom. And over time, we've come to learn some of these things and have better security. It's just an example of where if something is growing in popularity, then we need to improve our cybersecurity in those areas. Because if the masses are using it more, then threat actors, malicious users they're going to go for big targets, things that are easy, rather than less likely elusive targets that will require a lot more funding, a lot more effort on their part. We also learned that the Stimulus Act and the coronavirus relief funds, they were big targets as well. Unfortunately, a lot of people lost jobs, or they were put on furlough, and people were struggling. They couldn't pay their rent. They needed income and they didn't know how to get it. And the government did a really great job of bringing in some relief by announcing the Stimulus Act. Unfortunately, again, people taking opportunities of the fear and how are you going to survive? How do you feed a family? How are you going to pay your next bill? They started doing phishing via emails, setting up fake websites, vishing, which is a voice form of phishing, where they call and pretend to be someone they're not. And so yeah, there were a lot of scams out there, and the statistic I read was somewhere on the order, if you take all the average of all the millions lost in these scams and you averaged it out per person, I think it was on the order of a couple of hundreds of dollars. So imagine every person in this presentation that's attending lost a couple $100 through this. It's not a very fun thing to think about. So I mentioned this earlier, remote work. It was, for a lot of companies, it was a nightmare. It was making that transition. Not necessarily all because the company was not prepared. Also, there's the home aspect of it. People had to do sensitive work in a home environment where it was probably not set up for sensitive situations. Imagine you're working on financial data that explains and captures how the company is doing financially, what are their opportunities, how are they going to be making revenue and their projections. And they're running on a Wi-Fi network that's using a WEP and versus WPA2, which is a secure version where WEP is unsecured. So that could potentially allow someone that knows that a person works on financial sensitive data to jump in through the Wi-Fi. And not everyone had the luxury of working with work computers or computers dedicated just for schoolwork. They had to use their own personal laptops, home computers, and they were probably not set up with the same rigor of protocols. Antivirus, anti-malware, data leak protection software that would normally be in a corporate or IT environment. Ransomware attacks have been growing a lot, and hospitals have been under a lot of attack. And unfortunately, some lives were lost because equipment went down or systems went down that prevented life support systems, or even just the documentation on a person to get carried over effectively. And if you give someone the wrong medicine or that a life support system goes down, that's very life-threatening. And service providers were also getting affected. Why attack a company directly where you can get into them via a third party? Several years ago, Target was a big was big on the news because they got compromised through their supply chain. A supplier had weak network security and IT security, and an attack to that resulted in having access to that supplier's network, and since that network had access to Target's network, they were able to jump in and compromise Target. And so that threat's still very real, and attackers are taking advantage of that. And there are many other threats we can think about that we've been experiencing in 2020 and might experience. So cloud jacking, a lot of businesses are moving their sensitive computation to the cloud. Amazon Web Services, Azure, Google Cloud, and many others. And if they can compromise their account, they now have access to sensitive data, company processes, computing. It can be very bad. Internet of Things and smart devices, we mentioned that earlier, it's still a growing threat. The number of devices is growing exponentially, and it's outgrowing the population. I saw a statistic that the average person has at least 5 devices, and that number is starting to grow. They're attacking mobile phones. The presidential election has been a big concern. And related to a presentation that Dr. Gofman and I talked about earlier, like the number of cybersecurity personnel and the talent is lacking. So as the threat is growing, and it seemed very, very significantly this year, and there weren't enough people to help combat the problem. So what can we do to do our part to address some of these concerns? So with Zoom security, we've learned a lot of etiquette over the use of it in the past 6 months. So these are some pointers you probably already know, or you might. The phone one was new to me. I was researching that, and I see many times that the meeting passwords for the client are there, but when you go into the phone, it never asks you for a password. So there's a company that recommended doing that, and I thought that was a very amazing device. And unfortunately, some of these settings are available in the free tiers. You don't necessarily have to have a paid version. The free tiers have these protections in place, but they're not enabled by default, and sometimes they're in an obscure location in your settings. So what do we do in situations like the Stimulus Act and the COVID-19, or the upcoming Stimulus Act, which is a big thing on the news? When you know something is popular and it's on the media, and it affects you personally, like it affects your financial situation, you're emotionally vested in the situation, step back and try to understand that you should look at the situation objectively, and that, trust me, it's very difficult. I've been in my own fair share of situations that have gotten the best of me, and unfortunately, and step back and try to find actual information. Don't just get your information from a news article or an ad. Try to find, in this situation, it would be a government site. Get the information directly from the government. They're the ones that are giving out the money. We should learn from them. And if anyone calls you or sends you an email saying that they're going to help you get through this, get the money to you faster, there should be red flags there. And never give out your financial and personal information. If someone calls you for your social security number or for that bank transfer, it's very sad. I was reading an article about this young student in China who her parents had sacrificed so much just to give her a couple $1,000s to make it into college, and she got a phone call saying she got accepted and that she was going to get some financial aid, and then a second call came in a few minutes later offering that financial aid as long as she gave a wire transfer as a proof of faith. that she was going to go to school, and it ended up being, a second call ended up being a scam, while the first one was an actual real phone call from the university. And it's so sad about her losing all that money for her parents. And also, it was really devastating article. So just be cautious if in these kind of situations. With remote work, even if you're not doing secure or sensitive work in your home, take the time to secure your home router. And I recently had to reset my router's settings because I had an upgrade issue with the provider, and I had set up my network securely several years ago, and those settings were lost. And so I was trying to put that back in, and after a few weeks, I decided to do a network scan, and I found an alert saying there was Telnet open, and I started worrying. I was like, where did I enable Telnet? This is a big no-no. Cybersecurity 101, disable Telnet right away. And it turns out my router was serving it. And so I didn't know. And you know, I didn't think of taking the time, and I should have, to do the scan right away. And sometimes those router settings can be kind of difficult to understand, or they're buried away. They have some advanced settings. So if you're not sure, work with their IT help desk and see if you can get help, or for at a company, ask if you can get time there to help you, because it's in the vested interest of yourself, your own family's financial well-being, your security posture, and also for your schools and your business. And if you can afford it, get a dedicated computer or ask your company if they can provide one for you. So just kind of want to summarize what it means to do your part, how to be cyber smart. It really comes down to cyber hygiene, that if you enable MFA, this one's the second one I think is very important. If once you get a device, you get your new iPhone, you get a new computer, you install a new piece of software, take the time, go through every setting on that device and know how it's configured. The manufacturer assumes a general settings that benefits most people, and in some situations they turn off secure settings because it's easier for the user. And so just know what settings are available and touch them all, and try to secure it as best as you can. And if the same thing with your networks, and then avoid. A lot of problems could be solved with avoidance. I got an email from PayPal saying that there was a $22 deduction from my account, and there was a big button there that said, "Here, click here to view the results." And I started freaking out, and unfortunately, I caught myself like, "Wait a minute, let's step back here. Let's figure out. Instead of clicking the link, let me go directly to PayPal and find out." And log in and find out if that transaction is there. So stepping back and avoid clicking and sharing can go a long way. And related to the very beginning of the presentation, assume your devices are listening. And last but not least, ask for help. If you're not sure how to do something, ask for help. Go to forums, go ask a friend, classmate, someone you know who's knowledgeable in cybersecurity, or your IT department. So with that, I'd like to just present a little bit about what VeriToll does. We work in the tolling and transportation space. We build software as a solution. We work in the cloud. And I'd like to announce that there's a couple giveaways, and one of them is for my newly published book on serverless computing and the security aspect of it. It's a growing field, and if you're interested in this, hopefully you find this book useful. And thank you very much.
Okay, I guess we're at the question and answer section of our session. And I do have one question. I think this should be directed to our campus security. Maybe Tony can answer this question. Joseph Rivero asks, is the Wi-Fi at CSUF WPA3 Enterprise?
I believe we are. We were on WPA2, and I believe we've upgraded, but I've sent the email to the network team to make sure.
Thank you. Okay, I have another couple of questions here. Anonymous asks, I have been finding myself utilizing Apple Pay for my day-to-day using my Apple Watch. What are your thoughts on these touchless payment systems? This has got to be for you, Miguel.
That's a great question, and I think it comes down to personal preference and making sure that you've secured your Apple account and secured your watch. Like the watch was designed to work well with the phone with Bluetooth, and Bluetooth has had some vulnerabilities over the years. So I personally disable Bluetooth as much as possible when I'm not using it. And and my own personal preference, I've been avoiding the use of the Apple Pay and the Apple Watch just because of my own comfort level. I like to be able to see the chip go in there, and there's technologies like RFID scanners that can pick up the number being transmitted through RFID. But that said, it takes a lot of effort to make these compromises. Like Dr. Gofman was talking about, the effort required for biometrics is pretty hard, and the credit card providers have done many things to make sure there are no fraudulent transactions, because every time there's a fraudulent transaction, they have to pay for it, and it costs them money in the end. I would recommend, though, for your credit card, if you have linked, to enable push notifications or text messages anytime there's a transaction of 1 cent or more, or just the minimum amount, like if it's $1. So that way you get a notification on every transaction. So that the likelihood of you finding a fraudulent transaction is higher and faster than if you waited for a statement, where it could be already thousands of dollars in charges. Dr. Gofman, do you have input?
Sure. Thank you, Miguel. I think that was a very valid analysis as well. I basically agree with everything that Miguel said. The only thing I would like to add is that when it comes to online transfer of money, banking, credit cards in general, actually, that part of the payment is very much secure because there are so many compliances, there are so many audits they have to go through. On top of that, a lot of those systems, they're based on time-tested protocols. They're being very rigorously pursued. Now, it's not to say that there are no problems there. There are definitely problems there that should be addressed, and we hear about them in the media. However, the most vulnerable point when it comes to payment is not the online transfer, but it's actually the point of sales. So, for example, when you go to a restaurant, well, I guess it's not very relevant these days, but when you go to a restaurant and you provide your credit card to the waiter, I'm not even going to talk about how they can steal, the information about your credit card or anything like that, though those concerns are there. But the terminals which are used to swipe the card, oftentimes those are not very secure because they're often not updated, they're not maintained up to par, unlike, for example, all of those online systems which you talk about. So the point of sales is the most vulnerable part when it comes to payments. And when it comes to using Apple Pay or similar systems, I think they are pretty secure compared to the terminal which the waiter uses to swipe your credit card. So, like, once again, depending on your comfort level, you may choose to use or not use it. And yeah, Bluetooth is something I would be suspicious of. I would personally prefer a payment system which would rely on the NFC, the near field communication, because that's much harder to hack than Bluetooth, and it just has a much better security track record than any Bluetooth system that we have heard of. But not all payment systems support that yet. So that's my thoughts on that, if that helps.
If I can add to that, first of all, to correct the first question, the campus is on WPA2 Wi-Fi. And as far as online payments, I'm just going to talk personally the way I do it myself. As was mentioned before in a couple of presentation, make sure everything you do outside work and at work as much as you can is on MFA, enable MFA, especially on all your financial stuff. And I happen to use PayPal, so MFA is enabled, but I also, for my financial style like Zelle and PayPal, it's you can go online to your bank and add an additional checking account with like $10 in it. Some banks like mine, you can actually have $0 in it, and only tie that bank account to your, to your Zelle or your PayPal. That way, hackers can drop money in, but if they want to take money out, in case you're compromised, there's nothing to take out. And when people transfer money to me, I log in right away and transfer it from one account to that, to the other account in 10 seconds.
Thank you. I have another question from Anonymous. What is your opinion on online fundraising transfer systems like Venmo or Zelle? Zelle? Who wants to field that question?
I could start if you want to.
Dr. Gofman, pardon me?
Sure. So basically, when it comes to the online fund transfer systems, as long as you do it, for example, from your PayPal account or similar kind of source, I think you have very little to worry about. My main concern here would actually not be the security of the fund transfer system itself, but social engineering, which often goes into getting you to transfer the funds to somebody. So, and I've seen so many cases, and I can think of so many examples where people were duped into transferring funds using some of the systems that we talk about. So, but as far as using Venmo or Zelle itself, I would not be as concerned about their security as I would about once again being socially engineered into doing so. That happens all the time, and I think that's the biggest problem. And I think this underscores the overall theme of cybersecurity. Whatever technology you're talking about, we can patch the technology, we can evolve the technology, we can replace the technology. You cannot really patch, replace, or evolve people yet, at least. So, yeah, I think Miguel may have a good input on that.
I agree with all your points. The social engineering aspect is probably the biggest threat. And when I was buying my home, there was a lot of wire transfer fraud through the escrow process. And so the guidance that they suggested was when you get an email from the escrow company saying, here's the funds to transfer it through, call the escrow company and have them tell you the number and make sure it matches what's in the email, because someone could have manipulated the email or intercepted it and changed the number to a different account. So whenever it comes to transferring funds, assuming you have set up good passwords, MFA, and all that to secure your account, make sure you're in contact with the person you're trying to transfer it in. And if you get a funds request, Zelle does that. You get an email saying, oh, this person's requested money from you. Click here to send it. Call the person and ask, why are you asking me for money? That's all I have to say.
Yeah. I think Miguel is absolutely right in that. And just to quickly add a point in here, if, for example, you're contacted by quote unquote the IRS, saying that you're in big trouble for not paying your taxes, please transfer money through Western Union, Venmo, or Zelle. That's where the red flags would go up. Now, if you fall for that, can you really blame those systems for that, right? So just keep in mind that IRS does not ask people to transfer money through Western Union or or anything like this. And they're not going to tell you that, okay, we're coming to arrest you. Folks, that's just not how law enforcement works. If they need to come to arrest you, they won't give you heads up so you can start running. It just doesn't work like this. So social engineering is the biggest issue, and I think Miguel has an excellent point.
Thank you very much. We have run out of time. We have one more question. We may have to field that after the presentation. I want to thank you, Miguel and Mikhail. And I'm going to hand it to Denise.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gofman and Miguel, for this presentation, and everyone for joining. As a reminder, a link to the survey will pop up on your browser when you leave this webinar. Please complete the survey for a chance to enter in the opportunity drawing for a CSUF Titans NetGator or a copy of Miguel's ebook, Serverless Security. Also, please join our vendor partner in a virtual vendor booth to learn more about their products and services right after this session today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.